So as Kevin said, my name's Brian, and this is my wife and my daughter and I's third trip down here. So we like it down here too. It's awesome. And they told me I had the English speaking class, so that was good because I don't know Spanish, so I don't need a translator. I may need a translator. I don't know. Anyway, God put it on my heart to share my story, and I'll try to get through without crying. It's already starting to well up. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know that prayer does work, and I'm living proof of that. You know, in James 5:16, it says, "The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much." And those prayers usually were from my mom and my granny, and they just kept praying for me, and as I was growing up. And my story basically begins, and it's still there, in a small town in Arizona, Camp Verde. I was born and raised there, and not much to do in Camp Verde. It's a town of, there's 10,000 people there now. When I was growing up, there was maybe 4 or 5. And you play Little League baseball in the summertime, and go to the river, go swimming all the time, and just not a whole lot to do. And my parents, they had friends that they hung out with, and my dad would drink a beer occasionally. My mom never drank in her life. She took me and my brother. It was just, I kind of grew up in the Leave It to Beaver era. I had a mom and a dad and a brother, and it was a good family, good parents, and they loved us, and they raised us. They raised us the best they could, and I love them for that. And my mom would take me and my brother to church, but nothing ever stuck. It wasn't anything about a relationship or any of that stuff. It was just church. I learned the Bible stories and that. But when we became teenagers, we seen that my dad, he never went to church. So me and my brother decided, well, we're not going to go either. So we didn't go to church anymore. And that the thing about my parents' friends, my dad would drink a beer occasionally. So me and my brother thought, well, hey, we'll sneak a beer occasionally. So, at 8 or 9 years old, we started sneaking a beer out of the refrigerator of my friend's house, and we'd go out and drink those, and that kind of continued on through teenage years. It and got a little bit more drinking, and we would go to high school football games when I was in grade school, and we would pay the Native Americans would buy them Tokay, and they'd buy us beer. So we would get drunk and at the football games, and that just kind of continued on. And then we get into high school, and I played sports in high school, and when we were playing sports, we didn't drink that much because we'd get in trouble if we got caught. So, but we would have our parties during school and all of that, and it just continued on until like my senior year. My friends, they were smoking marijuana and doing that kind of stuff, and they kept trying to get me to do that all the way through school, and I wouldn't do it. Well, my senior year, I decided, well, I'll give it a try. So the first night that I ever smoked marijuana, God was trying to talk to me back then, because that night, my best friend that I've known my whole life died in a car accident. But nothing made sense, I just like, oh, well, whatever, And even the pastor, when he done the funeral, I still remember the words that he said, because my friend didn't know the Lord either. And the pastor that gave the sermon said that if Terry could come back right now, he would tell you that hell isn't any fun. And, we're all just like, whoa. But, still, there was no background there for me to understand what he was really talking about. It was like, oh, well, when I get to hell, we'll have a party, big deal. So, like I say, even back then, the Lord was trying to talk to me. And my junior year in high school, I met a girl. We started dating, and we actually got married after high school. She went to 1 year of college. We got married. Then we ended up having a couple of kids, a couple of daughters. I had, 2 daughters, and we still partied. I still did the drugs, and actually we started getting into actually more drugs, the speed, the cocaine, that type of stuff. And even with our kids, we were still going out on the weekends and doing our thing. And her mom was going to a church there in town, and she talked us into starting to come to church. Well, we started going to church, but we would still party on Friday and Saturday night. So I was going to church hungover, but I thought I was okay. You know, it's like, hey, I'm going to church. I must be okay, you know. But I couldn't tell you 15 minutes after I walked out of the building what the pastor said. And our kids were 3 and 4 years old, and it was my wife's 25th birthday. And we stayed out all night, partied all night, you know, did the drugs, the drinking, the whole deal. And then the next day I was taking speed just to stay awake at work, and I got through work, and then she had a softball game that night. So our 3-year-old and my wife, we went to her softball game, and then after the softball game, we went over to a bar and had a beer, and I was just dead tired, you know, and so was she because we'd been up for 36 hours, and so we were driving home from the town's about 15 miles away from where we live. We're driving home, and I fell asleep, and the car went off into a canyon. Nobody was buckled up, and it flipped 2 times end over end, rolled a couple of times, and I remember walking out of the windshield because it wasn't there anymore, and screaming and hollering, trying to find my wife and my daughter, and I couldn't find them, and I finally heard my daughter crying, and I picked her up and crawled back up onto the highway, and back then there was not much traffic going from town to town. It was like midnight. And so, you know, a couple cars went by, but then it stopped. So the next car by, I just stepped out in the middle of the road and stopped them. And I handed him my daughter so I could go back and look for my wife. And I didn't even know who it was when I handed my daughter to him, but it was my cousin. And so anyway, I couldn't find my wife, and I came back up, and then by that time, the ambulance and the cops and everybody were there. And my daughter had... before the ambulance got there, the people told me, said, your daughter's not doing too well. And I said, well, take her to the hospital. You know, and the hospital was in Cottonwood. So they took her to the hospital, and then the cops and the ambulance and everything showed up, and they found my wife, and she was actually laying right beside where I found my daughter. I had to actually step over her to get to my daughter, and I didn't realize it. But she had held on to her through the whole accident. And she was killed. And so when they told me she was dead, then I went to the hospital. And actually the only thing I had was just cuts and bruises. I was fine. And my daughter, they had to fly her to Phoenix at that point because she had a broken leg and had contusions on her lung. And so they took her to Phoenix. Flew her down that night. And then the next day, I drove down, and so when she was in there a couple of days, and then I wanted them to bring her back up to where we lived to set her leg and do all of that. So they brought her back. Well, before they let her out of the hospital, they told me that they were listening to her heart. And they said she had a hole in the upper chambers of her heart from birth, and nobody had ever found that. So they told me when her leg heals, you need to bring her back in for open heart surgery. And I'm going, okay. You know, it's like, okay, I just lost my wife. Now you want me to bring my daughter back for open heart surgery. So, you know, at that point is when the Lord got my attention. It was like, okay, can you hear me now? Because he'd been talking to me, you know, and it was a pretty hard time. And she had a cast on, a full body cast for 6 weeks. And so once that got done, then we took her back down for open heart surgery, which she had to have that twice in 3 days, because the first time they did it, it leaked. So they had to go back in 2 days later and do it again. And, you know, just seeing my daughter laying there with, you know, tubes down her throat and tubes hanging out of her, you know, it was just heartbreaking. And, but she was, you know, she was such a good kid. You know, she's like a trooper through the whole thing. You know, it was pretty awesome. And through all of this, you know, the Lord's starting to talk to me, and I'm starting to listen a little bit. And this verse here is my life verse at this point. I didn't realize it till later on, but Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work together for good for those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Which, the rest of the story is all things work, when you love God. And so after she had her heart surgery, this kid has been through a lot. And about, 3 or 4 months later, she was in town with my brother, and she was getting out of his pickup it was on a hill, and he had parked there, and she was climbing out, and a car came down the hill and ran into the front of his pickup, and she slipped down under the front tire, and the pickup rolled. He was trying to pull her out, and the pickup rolled over the top of her. So I was just like, "Are you kidding me?" And so she had some internal injuries, and she had to go back into the same hospital she was at for the heart surgery. And she was in there for 30 days and just was not getting any better. And it was just like she was just laying there. They had to feed her through a tube, and it was just, I couldn't fix her. I'm a guy and I want to fix things. I couldn't fix it. Then 1 Peter 5:6-7 says, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you." And basically, I just knelt beside the bed one night, and I said, "Lord, I can't fix this. She's yours. If you're going to take her, take her." The next day, she went home. So, it's just, our God is an awesome God. And he, it was just amazing to me. It was just, him talking to me again, saying, "Just give it to me." So, sorry. So anyway, she got home, and the thing is I still, God was talking to me pretty loud. And I still didn't get it. I was still drinking. I'd given up the drugs. The drugs were gone. The night of the accident, that was the last time I ever did drugs. I would still drink, and there was a void that was in me, and I couldn't figure it out. I was trying to fill that void with drinking, with women, with it was just I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was going to church. I was learning more. But it just hadn't sunk in yet. And but our God is a God of second chances. And thank God he gave me that second chance, which she's sitting right there. It's my wife, Julie. And God put her in my life. We played softball together on a co-ed team. And she was always a good friend, and I started talking to her a lot, and she would just talk to me, and she would let me call her at 2 o'clock in the morning when I couldn't sleep. I would call her, and she would talk to me, and that friendship just kept growing. We became best friends, and we would go places. She had a son. I had my 2 daughters, and we would go places together, and just hang out, and she always understood. She was just there for me to ramble and talk, and she didn't even have to say anything. She just had to be on the other end of the phone. And then I started getting a hunger for the Word, and the church that I was going to was just like, he had sermons that he taught I think he had a year's worth, and he just did them every year. It was like the same thing over and over and over, and it's like I wasn't getting anything. And Julie was going to the Baptist church in our town, and there was a lot of younger people there. The church I was going to had a lot of older people. Nothing wrong with older people, because I'm getting to be one of those. But at the time, I was 27, and it was just like there was just nothing there. And so we started. I switched churches. Started hanging out with people my own age, and the pastor there, he really was teaching right at my level. And so it started to grow a little bit more, and it I was going to say I fell in love with Julie way before she fell in love with me. And she didn't want to love me because I had 2 kids and it was like a package deal, and she wasn't sure she wanted that. But I chased her till she caught me. But still, we would still party and drink, and even with when we started dating, we were still going out on Friday nights and stuff, but I was still, the Lord was still working on me. And it was about 2 years after we got married that I was at a men's conference at another town there close to ours, and a guy was talking up there, and he was the ex-chief of police of Los Angeles when they had all those riots and stuff, and the stuff he was talking about was just like, wow, there's so much garbage out there, and the Lord just spoke to me. He said, you know what? You don't need any more garbage in your life. You need to follow me. You need to give your life wholly to me. And he took the drinking from me that weekend, and I haven't drank since. And that's been about 18 years. And he just took it away, just like he did the drugs. It's just like if I turn it over to him, he'll take it. And he did. And Julie and I, we had a blended family after we got married, and there was some hard times. You always want somebody to love your kids the way you do, and it's hard for people to do that. And and I may not have been the best example or the best husband that I should have been for my kids and for my wife. Not a real good disciplinarian, because all the stuff that I've been through, it's just like I spoiled my kids. Before Julie and I got married, I spoiled them because, I didn't know what else to do. It was like, they're my kids and they don't have a mom, and, I felt sorry for them, so I just bought them stuff and spoiled them, and then Julie had to deal with what I had created. And it was hard. It was hard at times. So, but we raised our kids in the church. We left that Baptist church and went to because they switched pastors, and the pastor that came in, he should have been a college professor because, I was a baby Christian, and he was talking stuff that was like way over my head. And so some people said, hey, come over to Calvary. Well, we went over to Calvary, and the pastor there was like, it's like, man, he's right on my level. So we started going there. And we raised our kids in that church, the same church that we go to now. And kids are going to make their own decisions. I'll switch over to the way our kids went. My oldest, she, they weren't bad kids. It's just, I think when teenagers get to be 17 or 18 years old, God flips a switch in them to where when they graduate, it's okay for them to leave because they're a pain. But because my oldest daughter turned 18 before she graduated, and she decided that she didn't need to follow our rules anymore. It's like, I'll stay out as late as I want, and I do all, well, when she graduated, I said, okay, so go follow somebody else's rules. You don't want to follow these rules, then go on. Well, that summer, she went out and she went and lived with her grandma, and she did everything that she thought she wanted to do, and her grandma never told her when to be home or nothing like that. So she had a scholarship to go to a university in Flagstaff, and she ended up getting pregnant that summer. And so she went to college for 6 months, and then she had to drop out to have her baby and start raising her daughter. And and the thing is you could see how we raised her stuck, because the guy that got her pregnant, his mom told her, well, if you were my daughter, you would have already had an abortion. And she told her, well, abortion's not an option, which you could see that the way we raised them, kind of some of that stuck, So she had her baby, and she did college classes online, and it took her 6 years to graduate college instead of 4, but she did. And she ended up getting married to a guy from our town, which I'll come back to her story in a minute, because it's a pretty neat the way it ties in. Then my other daughter, Bonnie, she decided when she was 17 that she would get into drugs. I mean, this girl was the one that got ran over, got the heart surgery, all this stuff. And she was a really good kid up to the point that she started hanging out with the wrong people, and she started doing the drug thing. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I don't know what you tell them, you can talk to them all you want, but they're going to make their decisions. Well, we found some pictures of her and her friends in our house having a blowout party, while we were doing some other stuff. Well, she ended up leaving and moving in with her sister. And she went through a whole lot of, after she did graduate school, but when she graduated, she got into more drugs, the meth and the whole deal, and was arrested several times, went through rehab, got out of rehab, went right back into the drugs. And she just wasn't, and she had actually gone on a mission trip her senior year of high school. And after she got back from the mission trip, that's when Satan just attacked, and he won with her. And she got so far, she was living on the streets in our town. And I told her, I said, well, you can't come home the way you are. I can't let you live in my house the way you are. So she was living on the streets for a little while. And, that was heartbreaking to see that, and it was hard to do that, but it's kind of what she needed at the time. And then I'm going to come back to her story as well, because all of this is, it's pretty amazing how it all ties back up. And then Julie's son, he lived with us, and his dad lives right in the same town. So it was kind of split time with him, and it seemed like every time that we would have him at our house, his dad would call, and his dad owns a big farm in town. So, he has all the big toys and the big tractors, and every time we would have him, his dad would call and say, hey, you want to come and, run the tractor or whatever? So, he would, it would be a big fight with his mom. So, as always, his mom was the bad guy because she wouldn't let him go because it was her time. And so it got pretty bad for a while. It was always a big fight. And then when he was, I think, 12 years old, he decided he wanted to go live with his dad full time, which was hard on Julie, and it's hard on me, to see my wife going through such a hard time. And she decided that if God can part the Red Sea, He can take care of my son at his dad's house. So she told him, said, go ahead. And I think it was a good decision. I think their relationship is a lot better, a lot stronger for all of that, because he finally seen his dad for what his dad really is. And him and his dad, they don't get along very well. But he does work for his dad still. But and then there's Briley, our 16-year-old. She's right back there. She's kind of our miracle baby. But she makes her decisions as well, and it's hard to see your kids make decisions that sometimes aren't so good. And but I think that through all of this, God is telling me that He wants to be in fellowship with us, and if it takes Him allowing my kids to go through things for me to be on my knees, to be in the Word, He's going to allow that to happen. And that brings me back to James 5:16. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. And that brings me full circle back to my kids, because I've been praying for them since they left my house. Every day, praying for them to come back into fellowship. And I guess it's my turn to see the results of that prayer, because my oldest daughter, Brienne, the one that got pregnant, her and her husband live in California. And, Julie and I and Briley went over there last year to see them. And they were going to a Methodist church there, and we went to church with them. And, we're used to Calvary, we're used to Kevin, where, he preaches for 45 minutes. So, we go to the Methodist church in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, it's over. We're like, okay, when's the service start? But, we started talking to them, said, hey, there's a Calvary right around the corner over there, and they're like, yeah, my daughter's like, I'm just glad I got him in church. I'm like, well, that's cool. Well, then it was like 2 weeks later, she called me. She said, you're not going to believe what happened. Or about a month later. She said that they were laying in bed, and her husband said, oh, we're too late for church. And he said, well, we'll go to second service. I said, well, no, we're too late for that. He said, well, let's just turn on the TV. and we'll watch church on TV. So them and their kids, they sat in front of the TV, and they turned it on, and it was Bob Coy from Calvary Chapel in Florida was preaching. And John, her husband, was like, wow, I really like the way he preaches. And Brianne's like, well, all Calvaries are the same. And so they started going to the Calvary. It was like, wow, okay. So, I mean, it wasn't like 2 weeks before that, Bonnie, I'm just kind of bringing all this together, how this prayer works, is her grandma was still going to that same church where I was at when my wife died, and they were, and she was kind of like, she still didn't want anything to do with church, and she was short on money, and her grandma said, well, they're hiring somebody in our nursery to watch the kids, $10 an hour. So she started going, they started paying her to go to church. And I'm like, well, whatever it takes to get her there, you know. But, you know, the thing is she started watching those kids, and then they said, well, you need to make a lesson plan for them. You know, you need to do something. So she's like, okay. So that caused her to get in the Word. Well, then, you know, she started going to, when the kids weren't there, she was still going to church because she liked the Sunday school class that was being taught there. So she started going, and then the kids that were going there, the pastor left. That was his kids. Well, she continued to go to church. And and then now she's talking to us about, you know, how great the Word is and how the Word's coming together. And it's just like, okay, Lord, there's the fruit from the prayer, you know. And it's just amazing to see your kids go through that much stuff. And I guess that's what my mom and my granny seen with their prayers for me. And we're still praying for Chance to get back into fellowship. I don't think that's too far off either. He just he's getting married, has a baby, so I think that's going to help him realize he needs to get back into church as well. So anyway, that's my story. Thanks for listening.